With us this evening, we have the wing chaplain, Michael Breznau.
Breznau, but yeah.
Close enough.
It's a
Close
challenge,
enough.
yes.
There you go. And with him, he has his lovely daughter Evelyn and son Carson, who is just like in BDU. We don't see him. He's there someplace.
Camouflage.
Yeah. We're hoping we'd have a chance to meet Stephanie tonight and the others, but yeah. A couple things about Chaplain Mike that I did not have in the program. He has only been, May 2023, he is a brand new officer, brand new in the Air Force. So he's getting broken in nicely as a wing chaplain. Yeah. Before he joined the service, he was in ministry for 14 years as a pastor, 9 years as a senior pastor. He led relief efforts in hurricane disaster zones, inner city humanitarian aid, and empowerment, as well as medical and orphanage care in India and Mexico. He also was a deputy sheriff who served as a volunteer community task force leader in greater Flint area. He's been very busy, and he is with us tonight. He is going to share some stories that people have shared with him, Christmas in the military.
Well, thank you, Kathy. So, I'm excited to be here, and for our first time, we'll look around this incredible museum in the lovely town of Fairborn. So, I ran the marathon, and this was my favorite spot in the marathon because you have about 16 miles of nothing all around the back end of the flight line. There's nobody cheering on except at the water table. And you finally reach Fairborn, and yay, people are cheering, and there's kids and signs, and everybody's happy. And one of the guys I was running with, we noticed, without even thinking about it, our pace went up faster, like by 2 minutes faster per mile, just because of all the enthusiasm and the camaraderie. Yep. So I'm excited to be here. As Kathy mentioned, I have my 11-year-old daughter, Everlyn Sarah Breznau, with me, and Carson, who's in first grade. He's 7. Carson Michael Breznau. And my wife is at home because, number one, she's carrying. She is 13 and a half weeks along with a baby girl on the way. And we also have a 14-year-old son, almost 15-year-old son, who has lots of homework because he has exams tomorrow. And then we have a 2-year-old son. So here's a little picture of us there, taken at a orchard somewhere out in the country. I can't remember the name of the place, but it was nice. And Jack there, who I'm holding, we actually adopted Jack. And my wife has had 9 miscarriages. We have 9 babies in heaven as part of our story. And we have been able, especially my wife, to assist those who are going through similar grief and loss. And yes, we have been in civilian ministry for the last 14 years. And people ask me, well, why after all that? And by the way, I'm 40 years old. Why would I go active duty in the Air Force as a chaplain? I remember going through MEPS, you know, that lovely place, Military Entrance Processing Station. I went to Detroit MEPS. And they weren't friendly. And I started out at 5 in the morning, and they're yelling at us, and it felt like basic training, and everybody in line with me was half my age. Half my age. They were 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And they were asking me, why are you here? And I'm like, yeah, I have 4 kids. And they're, what? So I said, well, I believe God's called me to be a chaplain. And, well, tell me about that, you know. So I had an opportunity to share it. There are 3 things that I communicate about why I'm a chaplain. One is that I could not wrestle away from the great need that our troops have, that our servicemen and women have for spiritual guidance, for care, for counseling, for pastoral shepherding, for life coaching, all the things that chaplains do, and to protect and provide for their free exercise of the constitutional right of free exercise of religion. And all of that, whether they're stateside or deployed. And for years and years, I was wrestling with that. January will be 21 years ago that I was in a private or military academy. And it was all run by veterans, such as yourselves. In fact, the 10-week basic training was run, when I was there, by a retired Marine Corps infantry officer. So it made Air Force OTS actually invariably easy in comparison to that. I knew how to roll my socks with a smile. I knew how to polish my shoes. I already knew how to iron. I knew how to march and all that, even though it was almost 21 years ago. It's amazing how fast those things come back when somebody's screaming in your face. So most of the guys in my squad and my platoon, they used Army and Marine Corps language, not Air Force, but most of them joined the service after that. I was 19 years old at that time. And periodically I talked to those guys who were in that with me, and they'd say, hey, ever thought about being a chaplain? Because they knew I was in pastoral ministry in a local church setting. And I'd say, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And then along the way, I start to work on my master's degree down at a school called Dallas Theological Seminary. And all my closest buddies were military veterans. How about that? Two of them graduated from West Point, and one deployed. When he thought he was going to end his time, they sent him to Iraq. He was a ranger, air assault, all that stuff, and his unit was tasked with securing that stretch of road between Fallujah and Baghdad. Half of them were killed. Half.
Yeah.
He survived. Along the way, he journaled every day a little bit, and he put those journals into 2 books. Look for it. It's called Faith in the Fog of War. You can find it on Amazon by Captain Chris Pleckenpohl. Faith in the Fog of War 2. He's now pastor in Austin, Texas. So he and other guys, they'd ask me, ever thought about being a chaplain? Some of them were going back in as chaplains. Some of them were not. They'd had enough. They were going into civilian ministry. But at that time, my wife and I, this was 15 years ago, considered it, prayed about it. And then 8 years ago, we considered it again. And then 2 years ago. And to fast forward the story, here I am. I had no reason to leave the lovely church that I was pastoring in Michigan. And I have to be careful where I use that word down here in Ohio. So we won't talk about that part. But there I was 6 years at a church called Mayfair Bible Church, and loving it. My parents were actually members of the church. My sister, her husband, and kids were all part of the church. And lovely community. And Flushing was the name of this little city outside of Flint. Kids were in good school. And I went out for an early morning run because I like to run, and that solitude, all of those reasons kind of bubbled back up. And it was during the Afghanistan drawdown. And some of those buddies of mine were pinging me, texting me, messaging me, saying, I lost some of my closest friends over there, and they were venting because they needed somewhere to vent. And then it all kind of flooded back. Who, if not me, who? If not now, when? And then thankful that God has given me good health so that I could pass MEPS and go to OTS and run around with people half my age and enjoy it. And they had the credentials, had the endorsement through an ecclesiastical body and all of that stuff and education. And God provided a way for us to come to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So that's a little bit about us. And people ask me how to pronounce my name all the time. How do you say Breznau? And say, I'm an American mutt. I'm German, Austrian, Czech, Polish, and some other stuff thrown in. And a family came over on the boat 120 years ago. There it is. So, Breznau. But we are here and glad to be here tonight. So I've been asked to share about Christmas in the military. I'd love to hear your stories too, maybe about your Christmases in the military. But here's a favorite picture from this past year as I've reflected on things. So there's Carson after Daddy was gone for 2 months down at Maxwell Air Force Base after OTS. And he clung on to me. He's my little buddy there. And then there's Jack on the right. And always smiling. There's a lot of blessings. Stories from field, sea, and sky. How does that sound?
Oh yeah.
So I have stories because I have a lot of military friends, and also I have one story from Army brat too, from field, sea, and sky. They gave me a lot of beautiful stories. Since I'm new to the Air Force, And this is our first Christmas active duty. I thought,
Oh, my word.
well, I don't have a lot of Christmas in the military stories myself, but I know my friends have lots of stories. And so you'll hear from some young and some a little bit older and some quite old. But these are all directly from friends of mine when I asked, hey, tell me some of your warm memories, or maybe your not so warm memories, maybe some of your difficult memories, maybe some humorous stories from Christmases in the military. So the first one is actually some from our neighbors over. We were in the prairies, and we just purchased a house in Xenia, so we're not in the prairies anymore. But here is Rachel, and then now Major Tom Rodriguez, U.S. Air Force. And they shared this. Well, Christmas in paradise is always interesting. Warm tropical weather, going to the beach on Christmas Day, barbecues outside. It might not be Christmas weather, but it's still nice to get together with friends and coworkers for the holidays. And she said, I spent 2 Christmases in Guam and then 4 in Hawaii. Wow. So I have not experienced that. Maybe over the next 25 years, we'll see. Oh, and Christmas in basic training was interesting. She wrote, it was right after graduation, so I was given a day pass to spend with my mom. We went to the base church service, then out to San Antonio to find somewhere open to eat. And she said, I think we ended up at Denny's or somewhere. Ever had that experience?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
I saw a video just today of the Army. They have this long-standing tradition, maybe not long-standing, but a tradition over the last couple decades of no matter where they were in their training, in basic training and boot camp, they'd send them home for a few days for Christmas. So they were just shipping them back home for a few days for Christmas today. So a buddy of mine from this place up north, so he sent me something, and there's a picture of him when he was in the Navy. And my son said, what is he doing, Dad? And I said, well, you'll have to let Kevin explain that. I'm not sure. But he said, Christmas in Guantanamo Bay. Ever been there? Raise your hand. So I have, my cousin's husband was there for 2 years. He passed away this year. So just retired the year before. But Christmas in Guantanamo Bay was fun. On the patrol boats, we took a bunch of crushed ice and had a snowball fight. Since all of us were from the north and it was 90 degrees. That was a good one. That's a good one. I don't know what maybe their CEO thought of that, but, it was Christmas. So, and then Katerina Van. For a little while, I pastored a church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where about 8 out of 10 last names start with Van. You ever been up there in the west side of Michigan where everybody's from Holland, the Dutch? They say if you're not Dutch, you aren't much, and I wasn't, so it didn't stay. But there was like Vandermeide, Vanderstel, Vanderhyde, so Katerina Van something. But she was an Army brat. She wrote this. So I remember one year when we were stationed in Hawaii, we lived in the historic housing directly across from the shipyard on Pearl Harbor. Her dad must have been a high officer, I'm thinking. We had a group of friends visiting from the mainland who decided to go for a stroll with my parents after Christmas dinner. They didn't get too far before someone decided to take a picture of one of the trees lining our street. The flash of the camera caught the attention of a nearby guard, and before they knew it, the group was swarmed with about 7 MP cars. Photography of the ships is strictly forbidden, so for about an hour, the MPs questioned the group, confiscated the camera, kept the SD card despite not seeing any ships on the photos. The photographer had been facing away from the shipyard. And my sister and I, she wrote, watched everything from our front window, very entertained, and convinced that Christmas must have been a particularly slow night for those on duty. So those nights can happen. I'm the mission support group chaplain, not the wing chaplain. I do have to say, Chaplain Bowen is still the wing chaplain.
Okay.
But I am an 88th Air Base wing chaplain. But the mission support group, one of the squadrons, of course, is security forces. And so I'm their chaplain, and I love it, and there are some slow nights for security forces out there at the perimeter, at those controlled access points. And this is next one from Kyle Kitagawa. Well, I guess I forgot to put his picture in there somehow. But, or maybe it's next. Let me see. Yeah, that's all right. But Kyle Kitagawa was a a fellow OT, they call it, or trainee of mine at officer training school this past March to May. And so he shared with me this in December 2017. Of course, he was enlisted for quite some time before becoming an officer. He said, I found myself mobilized for emergency state active duty for the Thomas Fire. It was a humbling experience helping secure neighborhoods damaged by fire during the Christmas season, seeing burned out houses with melted Christmas decorations in the front yard, and talking to people who've lost their homes at a time where most people think of spending the holidays at home with their families. That's one of the aspects of military service that civilians who've never served, maybe they don't realize how many humanitarian efforts we do to serve, especially state or National Guard, and providing services like that, caring for people in times of need. Then I'm not surprised that Lieutenant Kitagawa sent me this also, because he was our history buff. While I was at officer training school, somehow I got roped into being president of the OTS Heritage Society, the Officer Training School Heritage Society, which is to curate artifacts. So I'm right at home right here. And they said, now that you've been president for these 2 months, now you're forever a member of the OTS Heritage Society. And we got to take high-definition pictures of various things and installed some paintings on walls and painted murals in hallways. Kyle was the one documenting everything. You'd love to have him here. So he said, by the way, I've got a historical story. This is from where he often works at Vicksburg National Military Park. So here's a letter from a soldier fighting in the Civil War. Dear wife and folks at home, this Christmas morn finds me on board the steam Ohio Belle, 28 miles above Vicksburg, at a place called Milkins Bend on the Louisiana shore. We arrived here last night after a pleasant trip of 4 days from Memphis. We expect to attack Vicksburg at once, but the dinner bell rings, and I must attack that first. Good humor. All the way back then, people laughed. Major Joseph Leslie, 4th Indiana Cavalry, December 25th, 1862, wrote home to his wife about his Christmas dinner in the field. So he continues, perhaps I may well describe it. Mashed potatoes, hot rolls, butter, and chicken and beef pot pie, topped off with apple and mince pie, which does very well for a soldier. What do you think of that, Carson? That sounds pretty good. Yeah. So Major Leslie's meal doesn't sound that different from ours today. So something, and we at Vicksburg National Military Park wish those who celebrate a Merry Christmas. And this is a painting there at Vicksburg National Military Park, and that's where Kitagawa Lieutenant does his day job. So another friend of mine, he was a member of our church back in Michigan. He served in the Army, Daniel Gaines. And he said, my most memorable, and this is his picture here, his most memorable story was probably during, says, my tour in Korea. I decided not to use any leave while I was over there and stayed for the full year straight. Some of you probably done that. Yes? My dad and stepmom sent me a care package that had so many goodies in it. He added all those O's. There were homemade cookies, and he says, a literal pie that was homemade. Bags of better-made potato chips, bottles of Faygo, of course, from Michigan, so Faygo, pop. Letters from my 8 siblings and dad and stepmom, as well as church members. It was really kind of them to put all that effort and thought into that care package. And he wrote, and I enjoyed all of it while my roommates looked on. Just kidding. I shared lots of things with them. And here's a post, too, from the Air Force, from the Thunderbirds. So they posted this about 3 days ago. 'Twas the week before Christmas. In our hangar so tight, not a creature was stirring, not even a flight. Our F-16s were nestled with care in hopes that Boss Sheik wouldn't disrupt the air. Our pilots were resting all snug in their beds while visions of air shows danced in their heads. And our ground crew, out of coveralls with no practices left, we have just settled down for some well-deserved rest. The next two vignettes are from a dear friend of mine, Vic Glazier, retired Lieutenant Colonel Vic Glazier, who was a pilot in Vietnam, and lots and lots of flights, lots of missions, and he's a member of the Protestant parish congregation where I serve each Sunday, preaching there over the Prairies Chapel now. So he shared a couple of stories with me. He said, around Christmas 1967, there were constant reports of unidentified, slow-flying objects coming down from the north. On one day during this time, I had flown in the morning, and since I wasn't on the flying schedule later, I worked in the squadron the rest of the day. I had dinner at the club, saw a movie, and got back to my hooch, our quarters, around 2200. Sounds like a pretty good day. Almost immediately, I had a call from the squadron scheduler. They needed a navigator to fly a mission at 0:30, sometime after midnight. I protested, but he won me over by saying I would be flying with the best electronic warfare officer in Southeast Asia. We briefed and took off a few hours later, and shortly after takeoff, this EWO pulled out a bag of sour balls. And we proceeded to suck on those the rest of the 3.5-hour flight. War is hell, he said. It was definitely a quiet time in the war, but by the time we landed, our mouths were so puckered up we could barely talk. Next story. Almost a year later, after returning from Southeast Asia in May, I was scheduled to deploy to Japan just before Christmas. For this reason, my wife and I celebrated Christmas at Thanksgiving, since I wouldn't be there Christmas Day. As we got closer to the deployment, the date kept slipping. Finally, just before Christmas, the deployment was canceled, and we went out looking for a Christmas tree. We finally found a tree that would have made Charlie Brown's tree look pretty good. It was like a juniper with all kinds of garbage on the limbs, but it was all we could find. We took it home and covered it all with all kinds of bright Christmas ornaments, lights and tinsel, and at the end it didn't look too bad if you didn't look too closely. This was our first Christmas together as a married couple, but we were not believers at the time. Later we came to know Christ as our personal Savior and Lord, and Christmas took on a whole new meaning. This one is from Dennis Rosales. He was, and is, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yep.
So Dennis Ray Rosales is one of my best friends, and he said, I want you to be a chaplain, but I don't want you to be a chaplain. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you really need good chaplains, but I also know what you're going to go through. But he and his wife wandered into a church in Metro Detroit where I was, serving as a youth pastor, and they had some significant trouble going on, 2 young girls, and they experienced a lot of transformation in their marriage, in their hearts, in their minds, in their 2 kids. And he gave me a gift. It was a leather Bible cover that he handmade, sewn together, stamped my name on it, and he picked a piece of leather that had scars all in it. And he said, I did that deliberately so that you remember my scars of my life, literally and figuratively. He served as a Marine for about 10 years. So he said, I have a couple of stories on that, chap. One year I came home and surprised my mom. I told my brothers that it was my 2nd year in. I hadn't been home in over a year. So when they picked me up from the airport and brought me home, my mom wasn't there. We got a large box and they put me inside of it. They told my mom to open the box. And when she went to open it, I moved around and she thought they got her a dog. However, I popped out and she burst into tears and smothered me with a hug. And here's another story. My last year in, I had deployed in early September. I was married now, and my marriage was struggling when I left. My wife went to live with my friends in Michigan and got saved and changed her life dramatically. By Thanksgiving, we had reconciled our issues for the most part. I was having success on the wrestling team and was going to come home for the All-Marine trials in Virginia. However, my CO, Lieutenant Colonel Hamlin, nicknamed the Hammer because he was so rigid, declined my request. And now with only a couple days until Christmas, I wasn't able to get a leave request in. It was suddenly a lonely time. I had a tough time. We didn't have FaceTime back then, and calling home would cost $2 to $4 a minute depending on the size phone card you got. There were lines in the cold waiting for the phone to call home, and hope you got someone on the other line. Eventually got about a 20-minute call home to talk to my wife, and we made the best of it. This would have been during the Persian Gulf years. He's about 15 years older than me. Of course, I cried on my 15-minute walk back to the barracks. Mail was running behind a couple days, but I had a couple unopened letters waiting for me. I was so sad and lonely, I can't explain it. I couldn't understand how callous God must be to let these circumstances happen like this. I got to my room and no one was there, and after crying out for some sign of love, I noticed there were a couple envelopes on my rack. I didn't even look at the from, and in pitiful angst opened the first one, and read something like this: Dear service member, I am in 2nd grade, and I want to thank you for my freedom. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. Thank you. I broke down in gratefulness that some teacher somewhere thought about this and that God knew I needed this. I opened a couple more. Dear service member, you are my hero for keeping us free. Merry Christmas. I was a blubbering mess, and my tears fell all over the envelopes and letters as I couldn't hold anything back. I got on my knees and thanked God for giving me that sign that he still cared for me. Here I was, 7,000 miles away from my home, lonely and empty, and God used a teacher in some classroom with her 2nd graders to touch my heart. Those letters meant so much to me. I really can't say enough how silly it may seem, but how incredibly moving that simple gesture was for me and many others. Here it is almost 40 years later, and as I wrote this to you, chap, my heart was so touched. Shannon, his wife, is bringing me tissues because I can't stop tears at this incredible memory. You received letters like that? No, every about month or two I get a note or an email from the USO encouraging us to fill out letters and send them to our troops and care packages. Sometimes we can forget how important that really is until we hear from somebody who's gotten one. So there's another story. This one's a little different. So the year was 1863. 1863. And there was a young man named Charlie. And he saw newspaper ads like this. This one was put out to muster up regiments from Michigan in the winter. An excursion party for the sunny South. I mean, who wouldn't want to be part of that, right? Come. There was another one that said, come to the sunny South, no ladies allowed. But sign up. 9 months, volunteers. You're going to receive pay, and you're going to join the 2nd and 8th Michigan Regiments for a new company of sharpshooters. Come and have a party. 1863. So Charlie and a whole bunch of other guys signed up without the approval of his father. So without the approval of his father, he signed up, and he quickly impressed his supervisors. Of course, they would have had other names back then, but his commanders were impressed by his dedication, his skill, his education, his ability to lead men, and so they bumped him up and they commissioned him as an officer. His father, though, was extremely distressed by his son serving in the Civil War because it didn't turn out to be some party in the sunny South. By this time, it was the most bloodied mess we could ever imagine. Bodies scattered all across the fields, from north to south. And a nation divided, and cousins even at war with each other. I can't even wrap my mind around that. in today's generation. What would that? I can't fathom that. But his father Henry was especially grieved because 2 years before, Henry's wife, Charlie's mom, was working in the kitchen and her dress caught fire. And Henry, the husband, was awakened from his nap to his wife screaming. He rushed downstairs and tried to put out the fire with the rug on the kitchen floor, and then with his own body on top of her, trying to put out the flames. She was so injured by the burns that she died the next day. Henry was not able to attend his own wife's funeral because his face was so burned. He would later grow a beard to cover up the burns from that day. So there's Henry the dad, alone. And December 1st, now his son had been serving for about 9 months. He gets a letter. Yeah. Because his son, Charlie's military career, which had been going so well, he had been severely wounded in the Mile Run campaign. This letter came to the father on December 1st. The Mile Run campaign near New Hope Church. Recall that from reading Civil War history? Severely wounded. So there he is, Christmas season, and he gets this note. He rushes to his son's bedside, and on Christmas Day, there it turned out his son would recover. The injuries were not quite so severe as they initially thought. But there he is. And he hears the bells on Christmas Day. And this is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's story.
Oh my gosh.
And he wrote this poem. On Christmas Day, 1863, as a 57-year-old widowed father of 6, though one of the children died in infancy, and there's another one laying in the hospital. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play. And wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And thought how, as the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men, till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then from each dark accursed mouth the cannon thundered in the south, and with the sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent and made forlorn the households born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. And the truths of that song ring across the decades, even to today, and we ask ourselves, is real peace possible with the rumors of all the wars and the conflict across the globe and the dissonance in our own nation and the disunity that we face? But God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. And that's what I'm not going to stop believing. Thanks for inviting me tonight. That's what I have to share. Thank you.
So I know that some people have some stories from their time from Christmas, so share away. Really? Come on. Oh my gosh.
I'll go.
Okay, you go. You go first and others will follow.
So I had a couple different deployments that ran through Christmas. The first one was in Italy for 6 months. It was tough. I had my own apartment, rental car, and $150 a day in per diem. So for Christmas, I went back to Germany, brought my wife and kids down. Well, when you're deployed, you can't just go get a Christmas tree, and there's not a lot of shopping that can be done. So my wife had taken care of the presents, and we bought the kids just like a ton of construction paper. And they cut out a giant tree and paper ornaments, and we taped that to the wall, and that's how we celebrated Christmas.
Nice.
My favorite one, well, now I say it favorite, it wasn't favorite at the time. I was with the implementation force in Bosnia, and my tour was supposed to end on December 20th. Now, as we got closer to Christmas, people were getting excited for a couple reasons. One, for that group of people, it was time for us to rotate out. Two, President Clinton had said on December 20th, there will be no more I-4 people. And we were starting to get letters from home. We didn't get all the nice ones about, hey, glad you're over there. We got a lot of letters about how many guys have you killed. That was not funny. And we got letters from female prison inmates. Dear service member, I'm not looking for a husband or anything. I just want to say thanks for your service. By the way, I'm single. You can contact me on it. So, December 19th, all the young troops are getting excited because tomorrow's December 20th. There's no more I-4. That means we're all going home. That is not what it's going to mean. So, my boss, Major Booter, had said, hey, your replacement's here. If he's trained up, get on a plane and go home tonight. Oh, no, sir. If my troops are doing 120 days, I'm staying 120 days.
Yep.
So the next morning is the 20th. We got up and we painted out the I in I-4 and replaced it with a white S. We had been renamed the Sustainment Force. So there were no I-4 troops in Bosnia. I was fine with that. I was not fine with the fact that we had the worst snow and ice storm seen in Europe in 50 years. So I gather my gear, I get to the air terminal, and I wait. So at the end of the day, hey, there's no planes coming. Come back tomorrow. Well, it's not like I have a choice. So I come back the next day, hey, there's no planes coming. Come back tomorrow. So that third day, I had carved out my own little, territory, and I would just sleep with my hood pulled up. And somebody came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, Sergeant Conrad, Halle Berry is here. And I used some colorful language to ask if she had brought an airplane for me. And the answer was no, she didn't. So I said some things and I went back to sleep. Well, about 10 minutes later, our public affairs officer comes up and he's like, she was standing right behind you when you said that. And it's like, look, I'm supposed to be getting out of here. I could care less who's there. If she's not bringing a plane, doesn't mean a thing. Now, I had promised my kids I would be home on Christmas Eve. So it's the 23rd. We're not going anywhere. But the 24th, the weather had cleared, at least in Bosnia, a pretty decent amount. And a couple generals from Ramstein came to drop off TVs and gaming systems and stuff. So in the afternoon, some guys were going around the air terminal. It's like, hey, Sergeant Conrad, you're getting ready to leave. The generals want to present NATO medals to everybody. It's like, oh, I've already got one, but thanks anyway. So I had to go. So here's a line of maybe 25 or 30 people. Our boots are muddy, uniforms are not pressed. We're all cussing these generals under our breath for making us stand out in the cold weather for medals that most of us already had. So when the general got to me, pins the medal on me, says, hey, great job, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything I can do for you? And it's like, well, your aircraft is leaving this evening, and if you could have it reconfigured with passenger seats, we'd all love to go home. So he did that. So we get on the plane, we taxi out to the end of the runway, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait, and we can hear the pilot telling the tower, look, if we don't go now, we're not going. So, you know, everybody in their head saying, just go, give it gas. So they sent a de-icer truck out, and as soon as those things pulled away, the guy gave it the gas and off we went. And it didn't occur to me till later that, well, if the wings have ice on them, we're flying right towards a mountain range. So if he doesn't make it over it, that could be an unpleasant Christmas Eve. But when we got back to Germany, the civil engineers had literally plowed out a track for a C-130 to land in, right? You got your wing wheels and your nose wheel. And that pilot, man, I'd give him a medal if I could find him. He put it right down in there. So by the time I got home, it was 10 minutes till midnight on Christmas Eve. So I was able to keep my promise, and that is like one of my most favorite Christmas Eves ever. There you have it.
Thanks, Mark.
And told in an entertaining fashion.
Oh, come on, guys, really? Why do we have a Christmas? Tell about our window, explain our window.
I don't know anything about it.
The party suit, the bar, the Christmas tree, Vietnam.
Because remember what you said? There was Christmas even in Vietnam.
Yeah.
That's why we have a Christmas tree. Yes.
I just don't ever remember seeing any Christmas lights in Vietnam.
Well, we only put them there so they would catch people's attention, you know. I gave you the option. I didn't force you to do it. I gave you the option. Yeah.
Yeah. How many of you know Kathy?
Yeah.
But his grandson is going to be in Honolulu for his first Christmas.
Oh, yes. And he's just torn up about it that he's in Hawaii. Yeah. My favorite one when I was in NORAD. I was inside the mountain. And, you know, NORAD watched Santa go. Well, I was like, yeah, I got to go up in the big space where it's just mile high screen. And yes, there was a blip. Santa. And somebody walks up, puts it up. Somebody walked up and moved it up a little bit, moved it up a little bit, and I thought, well, hot damn. Excuse me. That's the neatest thing I've ever seen. Neatest. That was better than Discovery's maiden voyage. Yeah, that was pretty cool. No stories, no Christmas stories.
New Year's Eve?
Oh, yes. Do share your New Year's Eve.
I'm gonna turn this off.
That's bad.
No,
Remember,
New Year's Eve,
little
right
pictures.
after Christmas.
Little pictures.
It's 1999, we're getting ready to go into Y2K, and I was the medical ops squadron commander at Misawa, Japan. And Japan is one of the first U.S. bases on that other side of the date line. So we were gonna be one of the first bases affected by Y2K. Remember all the concern about Y2K? Everything is gonna fall apart, computers will stop, cars will stop dead on the road, everything is gonna go wrong. So we're in Japan, and it's Y2K, and about a week before, PACA sends us notes, you're one of the first bases, so you have to monitor everything on the base. So at the hospital, we have all this medical equipment, monitors and stuff. So we had a mandatory New Year's Eve party for everybody. Everybody had to be there. So we're all sitting around, we do the party around 11 o'clock, and about 10 minutes to midnight, everybody has an assigned piece of equipment throughout the entire hospital. And you sat there and just stared at that piece of equipment till midnight, and guess what happened at midnight? Absolutely nothing. So that's my most fond memory of a New Year's Eve, the evening of nothing.
Well, have you enjoyed your time?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Good.
it's so good meeting all of you. Yes.
No, we have some parting gifts for you. And I've got yours there. First of all, your glasses.
And step to the center.
And step to the center. You're required to step to the center also. Wait, let's see, this way. So I can see it. The Miami Valley Military History Museum Certificate of Appreciation to all who shall see these presents, greeting. The certificate is awarded to Chaplain Captain Michael Breznau. Alright. In recognition of his service to our great nation and for his continued dedication, commitment, and support to the ideals of patriotism this 20th day of December in the year 2023. We are We always try and find gifts that kind of are suitable to the occasion, to the person. And Barbara, our librarian, manages to do that a lot for me. So what we found is the history of taps.
Good Christmas break reading here, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, wow. Oh, thank you so much. Come here, Carson. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Well, Chaplain, we want to welcome you to Fairborn, our favorite town, right? Everybody loves Fairborn.
Really favorite?
And you mentioned something that you did here recently. You had the opportunity to run down Main Street.
That's right.
You don't normally get an opportunity to run up Main Street, but for the marathon, you get to do that. That's something that we in Fairborn are very proud of, because we are the only community in this whole area that the marathon goes through. And so several years ago, we have a marathon ornament to put on your tree.
Oh, wow.
Something special. These are very limited. There's very few of these left. We wanted you to have something to remember your run down Main Street in Fairborn. And we are so glad you're a part of our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
One other thing, it's
Oh my
Christmas,
goodness.
cookies and candy. Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes.
he's excited about that.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you.
Do you
Thank
guys
so
have
much.
any announcements, Dan? Mark? Nothing?
I know there's something, but it just escapes me at the moment. Oh, tell all your friends and family where we are. And keep in mind, we are a nonprofit, but we run on donations.
We
And
need money.
our rent was just raised by 20%. So if you know anybody, feel free to chip in. It will not break our hearts to get your money.
Or go buy us the building we need, only 40 square feet.
40,000.
square feet. All right, we're gonna let Chaplain.
Let me say one more
Sure.
quick thing. I think most, if not all of you know, we just put in the new Veterans Memorial.
Oh, yeah.
If you have not had a chance to go see that, it's on the corner of Pebble and Central. Chaplain, I don't know if you've had a chance to see that. That was a 6-year project among the citizens of Fairborn. We completed phase 1, which is the main part. It's the 10-foot tall, 6-sided obelisk. That's there. If you haven't seen it, please go see it. We were, hopefully, the bricks that have been ordered, some of you ordered brick pavers. The first order of those should be in mid-January. And then if the weather cooperates, the company that will lay the bricks will do that along with the granite benches late January, early February. And that'll be phase 2. And then eventually we also want to put the wall with more etched granite pictures of veterans from the area. So this is a work in progress. When you go over there and see the obelisk, the 10-foot tall thing, just know that that's the first part of what will be several parts. And I've talked to a lot of people from outside the area, and they say this is the best memorial they've ever seen because it's about people from this area. It's not just stock photos of people in uniform. It's the aircraft on the Air Force side. Those are all airplanes that were based here at Wright-Patton. The ship on the Navy side, interesting piece about that, that is the USS Dayton from World War II. It was a light cruiser. Unfortunately, after the war, they sold it for scrap, so it no longer exists. But we got things from the local area. On the Army side, there's a picture of an engraved picture of Charity Adams Ender. If
Early.
you don't know who she is, right over there is her uniform. very inspiring story about what she did during World War II.
Speaking of which, second Wednesday in January, we have a National Park Ranger who spoke last year about Buffalo Soldiers. He is going to tell the story of the 6th AAA Postal Battalion that she led.
And she's not from Fairborn, but her story is so inspiring, we chose to put her on the memorial. So everybody on that memorial, there's a story behind it. So if you want to know, ask one of us, we're happy to tell you. Our very own Greg Johnson, our 2-time space shuttle pilot, is on there. Jesse Snow, who unfortunately was killed in combat, he's there on the
John
Army side.
Spencer.
Pardon?
Spencer?
Yeah, Admiral Spencer, Fairborn High School graduate.
Yep.
He's on there. We have another Coast Guard admiral who's on there from Fairborn High School. So it's really a personalized memorial. And yeah, there's a story behind everybody who's on that memorial. So it's really